Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, what the Brussels is saying is that the Prime Minister, either doing a deal with Mr Corbyn or taking the most popular indicative vote, then has to go to Brussels and say, look, this is what we want now. This is what the Commons has voted for, and I'll try and do it by May the 22nd. And one of the options is the May deal with a customs union. That's what you've been proposing in the Commons. But tell me this, what is in the current withdrawal agreement and political declaration that would stop a customs union?
Oh, I vote for the current withdrawal. I voted 3 times for it.
So we could do
the political agreement is so vague that it encompasses what I really like. You could actually get a customs arrangement to get regulatory alignment look remarkably like the present customs union and the present single market.
So why are you adding on a customs union if it's already
to try to
implicit?
get the House of Commons to concentrate on a lowest common denominator for which I think that should be a majority. The customs union's quite an important thing because it solves most of the Irish border problem. And it gets all the car makers to start breathing again, and it enables you, with a bit of regulatory alignment, to keep Dover open and the Irish border.
But there's nothing to stop it as things stand. Sabine Wayand.
Hold on, Sabine. You won't persuade the House of Commons of that.
Well, Sabine Wayand, who is the number 2 to Barnier, she's the details person and done most of the work on it. She says that the deal as agreed with Britain requires a customs union as a basis of the future partnership. It's there.
Well, I agree. Open borders, you can't have open borders without a customs union and some degree of regulatory alignment. I agree with her, but the House of Commons won't buy that. The House of Commons might accept, if you spell it out clearly what you mean, that because of the economic advantages of a customs union, free access, the biggest international free market in the world, our biggest trading partner, you might buy a compromise. You're slightly undermining my position by pointing out that actually
it's already
that's
there.
why I voted for where
All right,
you
but
were.
let me ask you this.
You could get there anyway.
We leave the EU, but somehow we stay in the customs union. At most, that would give us a right to be consulted. We would not be part of any trade negotiations.
Well, in practice we would, because we're one of the biggest parts of the 500 million market. We're 65 million and one of the richer ones.
But you can't be part of trade negotiations unless you're a member of the EU.
But you'll have... Well, at the moment, what happens is I've taken part in EU trade negotiations.
Yeah, but as part of the EU.
British government in them. Yes, the Commission negotiate on a mandate, as they're ordered to by the governments. If we're not, strictly speaking, a member, they will still consult us.
Consult is one thing, but we would not play a part in devising that mandate. The EU27 will devise the mandate and the Commission will do the negotiations. They do not have to take account our interests.
Legally, formally, you're correct.
Yes.
I can tell you, having been in trade negotiations, there is a real world. And in the real world, when we're in the EU, they take more notice of the British than anybody else because we're the leading member on liberal economic reforms. Yes, but the idea that the British, the French and the Germans will not have a considerable say because you have more bargaining clout because it's those big markets that the other side of the table are trying to get into.
But hold on. Under your system, the EU would negotiate trade deals on our behalf. They may have consulted us, but we would not be involved in the decision-taking. They would negotiate a trade deal, say, with the United States, in which we would have to accept what they agreed on our behalf with the United States, but we would not necessarily be allowed into America. The Americans do not have to accept taking our goods in return.
You're sounding like a member of the ERG. It's your duty to be probing.
No, I'm sounding like someone who's trying to get across the facts, Ken Clark.
What you're describing are the formal, legal facts of which room you're in. What actually happens in trade negotiations, as they go along, behindhand, there are all kinds of other contacts, and we would still be one of the 3 major economies in the EU, and in practice, in Washington and in Brussels, the British would be involved?
Hold on. Look, first of all,
You're sounding like a rather pedantic lawyer on the.
no, you're the lawyer. I'm just the journalist.
I'm a lawyer, precisely.
No, I'm sounding
But the
like
real
someone who
world
wants.
lawyers
No,
have
I'm
to
sorry.
inhabit.
You can't do Cambridge Union tactics with me on this because you don't because you don't know the answer. I want to come back to this point at all. No, because it's not an answer. First of all, throughout these negotiations, the one thing the European Union has stuck to is the law and legal process. That has been clear from the beginning, and they've never deviated from that. I put it to you again that under your arrangement, the EU would negotiate on our behalf free trade deals over which we would not determine in the end, and the third party that we were negotiating with would not have to accept our goods on the same basis.
Oh, it would.
It wouldn't.
If we're in a customs union, we're going to be a party to the agreement. Once you're in a customs union, the free entry to our market is something the Americans are looking for. They want to sell us hormone-treated beef. I'll tell you what the problem is when you start dealing with the Americans.
No, I don't think you quite understand. The Americans would have access to our market. The EU would negotiate that. What the EU does not negotiate under your arrangement is our access to the Americans' market.
We would have the same. We would be party.
Why? That's not how it works with Turkey. Turkey does not have reciprocity.
But Turkey's position is different from ours. Essentially, as far as customs, tariffs, and therefore trade agreements are concerned, what I'm proposing is we carry on as now, except the formality would change. Strictly speaking, when the final formal council meeting is held to give the mandate to the negotiators and
we won't be there.
We won't be there. We'll have been there the day before in the talks, and we'll be there the day afterwards, and we'll be having our own contact with both sides.
Where will we be the day afterwards? There is no guaranteed reciprocity.
Where I was when I was involved in the TTIP.
But you were in. But Ken Clark, you were in the EU then. We had a say. There is no example in which the EU has allowed a third party to be involved in trade negotiations. You know as well as I do that it is very much a Commission competence. They protect it for EU members. No, it's not. They have a mandate.
They only deliver what they're authorised to deliver by the member states.
But once the mandate's agreed, over which we will have no veto. And let me come on to the other point. Do you accept that the EU could negotiate free trade arrangements on our behalf, and if we didn't like them, under your system, we would have no veto?
We wouldn't have a veto, you're quite right. But actually, the British market will be a very important component of what everybody was talking about. And it is absurd to believe that they would all follow the formality, have some lawyer sitting there saying you can't consult the British about this. The British would be asked to make some compromises.
You can't move in Brussels without lawyers.
No, it on the surface
it's a
is
legal
pretty bad.
Construct.
All I can tell you is I led for the government, in a British government, in the EU trade negotiations. It is a nuisance that we would not be a full member. When you get involved with talking about things, what you're really concerned with is business, trade. And lawyers are meant to solve problems, not turn up.
Let me bring
Daniel,
then I'll come to you. What do you make of Ken Clark's answers?
Well, we had Dr. Fox, the International Trade Secretary, in front of us at the 1922 committee yesterday, and he outlined some of the deficiencies with the customs union for the United Kingdom. So, of course, I don't want to be in a customs union because it will prevent us from having our own independent trade policy. But this will happen, and Ken's idea will take root, and we will be in the full-blown customs union with the European Union if my colleagues in the ERG continue to obstruct the withdrawal agreement. And I know I
you should speak to them privately.
You've
already mentioned it 3 times.
We are constantly
Liam isn't a hardliner, but he isn't an ERG member, but he's a very hardline Brexiteer.
Ken, we're going to have to let you go, I've been told. You have pressing engagements elsewhere.
Not so far as I'm aware.
Oh, you have.
I think a Northern Irish interview is coming.
Well, there you go. It
Try to reassure them on this absurd argument about the Irish backstop. No one will ever understand why.
All right. Okay. Well, go and tell them. Don't tell us.
Something called the Irish
Go and tell them
backstop.
because we need to speak to the Scottish nationalists.
Can I come in on this?
Important
Because-
part. But while we're doing the swap, Ken Clark, thank you very much.
Okay.
Mary Cray.
Thanks. I think you've set out there, and we've explored the limits of the fact that Ken's proposal is the lowest common denominator. It doesn't satisfy me. And the Labour position is full regulatory alignment with the single market. Because it doesn't solve the Northern Irish backstop issue. It doesn't solve the issue of non-tariff barriers to our trade. It doesn't solve our membership, for example, of things like the European Chemicals Agency. Huge chemical companies in this country which on the day of exit day lose their registrations and are then going to have to re-register in Europe and are going to have to re-register with a new bureaucratic enterprise set up here. So it doesn't get around. It gets around some of it, but it is not the perfect solution. That's why we either do Mrs May's deal with the ballot attached to it, or we have a long extension and we come to an agreement in Parliament about what will be best for protecting jobs and rights. But any deal now should go back to the people. It's very, very clear.
We'll come back to some of that in a minute, but we're now joined by the SNP. Philippa, welcome to the programme.
Hi there.
The SNP has been angry that it's not been involved in the talks that the Prime Minister's invited Mr Corbyn, but not the SNP. You're the third biggest party in the House of Commons. But isn't the reason for that is that you don't want to make Brexit work? You want to stop Brexit.
We would love to stop Brexit, but the Scottish Government were actually the very first to put forward a compromise deal in December 2016, and that was that the whole UK, and if not the whole UK, then Scotland should be allowed, like Northern Ireland, to stay in the single market and customs union. So we were actually the first to come forward with a compromise.
So
and
is
Ken
that still
Clark's
your
custom. Well,
is that still your position?
well, we supported Bowles, although it's not properly single market and customs union. We didn't vote against Ken's, but custom union doesn't give us freedom of movement. Immigration is existential for Scotland, and therefore it is, as Mary says, lowest common denominator. It doesn't solve the problems.
But if you're going to stay in the single market, and England isn't, and if you're going to have free movement into Scotland, and England isn't, you've just created one hell of a border between Berwick and Carlisle.
Well, isn't that strange? Because the government said that the common travel area wouldn't change. And they talked about that there would still be free movement of people in and out of Ireland, and that people would be able to travel freely to the north and into the UK. So why would you change that for Scotland? Is that just spite?
What would stop, under free movement, migrants coming into Scotland, and then if there's no border, moving straight to London?
So you think people who want to come to a country where they're welcomed, where they're allowed to work and live, would actually deliberately choose to go somewhere where they're classed as illegal and can't work and can't rent apartments?
This city is the largest immigrant city in the world now.
Absolutely. But
So they're welcome here.
No, they're
But
not.
they may just
Not unless
find it
they
more
earn more
difficult.
than £30,000 a year. They're
But
not
they may
going
just
to
find.
be
So the
welcome.
way to get round it is to come via Scotland. I mean, you could have that, but you'd have to be an independent country.
Oh, well, I mean, the way things are going, absolutely. But
Which is not on the cards at the moment.
But that was the offer. And the idea that the border to Scotland would be tougher than the border to Southern Ireland, which became independent in, blood and civil war, I find quite bizarre.
But there was no proposal.
The only proposal for the Irish border is around goods.
But there was no proposal that Northern Ireland would continue to have free movement of people.
But they were saying
Correct.
that people from the south, where there is free movement and will be free movement, would be able to travel freely within the common travel area across the four nations of the UK. So that is freedom of movement, not the right to live and work, but absolutely free movement. They have said multiple times they would not be stopping people and individual cars. It's an issue of goods.
What will you be voting for if it comes to indicative votes next week?
Well, at the moment, there aren't any indicative votes next week because, unfortunately, that amendment fell yesterday.
No, but we still think the
Speaker's
government
vote.
will bring forward indicative votes. If Mrs May has committed herself in her statement to that if she can't get an agreement with Mr Corbyn with which she can go to Brussels to say there's a Commons majority. She has indicative votes. Now, what, short of staying inside the EU, which is not at the moment an option for you, what would you vote for?
Well, our compromise is clear, which would be single market and customs union. Customs union on its own, which is obviously what's being talked about, as I say, doesn't solve freedom of movement. Our working age population is falling. So we don't just need and welcome people who choose to come and settle in Scotland. We absolutely need them. And therefore that is a critical issue for us. And the customs union doesn't solve it. I mean, you've already talked about some of the other weaknesses of being in a customs union and not at the top table.
Caroline, where is this going to go now? What would you rate the chances of Mr Corbyn and Mrs May coming to an agreement that Mrs May can present to Brussels?
I think the difficulty with either side coming to an agreement is that it has such a fallback for both of them, which is if whatever she would agree with that was acceptable to Jeremy Corbyn would not be acceptable to the vast majority of her party. And similarly, on the Labour side, there is a great problem there that could split the party in two there between those that are in favour of a second referendum and those that aren't. And also, as we've seen with Mary, those that could accept and swallow a customs union and those that want to go further and have single market alignment as well. So I don't think it's hugely likely that we will end up with that kind of compromise.
We've got our 6 tests, which say full regulatory alignment with the single market. I mean, you know, the way you do that is by staying in. Now, there's the freedom of movement aspect of it, but I think that we will have to, if we're getting to a compromise, we will have to see workers' rights, environmental rights, social rights protected.
But let me ask you this.
We don't want a situation where a can of beans has more right to travel than a person, and especially with the crisis in our NHS.
Mr Corbyn has said he raised the issue of a people's vote if there was a prospect of no deal. That would seem to be off the table for now. He raised it if it was a bad deal. If he agrees to something, by definition, it can't be a bad deal by his own lights. He doesn't seem that keen just to give you a people's vote on any deal or even a Labour deal, does he?
Well, Jeremy said in the Commons on the 25th of March that our policy, he restated it, was to have any deal put back to a confirmatory ballot. Now, I know we're only on the whatever of April.
I've never heard Mr Corbyn say that if he negotiated a deal...
I certainly did.
If he negotiated a deal, he would put it to a people's vote.
He has said in the Commons that any deal that the Prime Minister puts to the Parliament has to be... Well,
not his deal.
Well... It would be negotiated by her. It would be put by her to the Commons.
Are you saying that it's Mr Corbyn's policy that if he negotiates a deal, he's going to put that to a people's vote?
It's Labour Party policy as set out in September 2018.
No, that's not what the conference said. The conference did not say.
Well, the conference said that we needed 6 tests, which is what we've been discussing with the Customs Union and protection of rights, and that it should be put back to the people with an option to remain.
Okay. You're now, in our final seconds of our programme, you're faced now with either no Brexit or a softer Brexit, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. Can I just also say...
Briefly, because you only got 40 seconds.
I think I'm the only immigrant to this country on this panel, and I...
What, were you born in Poland?
Yes, I was born in Warsaw, and I celebrate the contribution of the 1 million Poles that have come to work in our country. They make a huge contribution, but the free movement of people has to stop. It has to be a managed process in the interest of the United Kingdom.
All right, we know that's your position. We thank you for that.